Hello, I'm Vanessa Gardiner. I'm a landscape painter. I've been represented by Thackeray for nearly 10 years now, and I'm here in my studio to talk about my show, Coastal Forms.
Vanessa, thanks for doing this Zoom. I was really lucky actually because I had a window of time, didn't I, last year to be able to come and see
You did?
before we were put into, restricted travel, etc. So I'm really thrilled to have actually been in the studio, looked at the work unframed, and know what's coming for this show. Tell me about this particular group because it seems to be very much about Cornwall.
Well, it was supposed to be an exhibition of Orkney, which I'd organised for May last year, but of course that was scuppered because of COVID. So I resorted back to somewhere I've known all my life and I've worked from for over 40 years, which is the North Cornwall coastline near Boscastle. And so nearly all the work in this show is from North Cornwall and then Godrevy Point and Tintagel Coast, and it's that area the whole exhibition is inspired by.
And with Cornwall, obviously it feels like it's a beloved place for you because it's in all the time I've known your work, which is beyond how long we've represented you for. It's always existed, and I just feel like it's a sort of go-to familiar beloved place. Am I right?
It is. I mean, I was first introduced there by my parents when I was about 5 or 6, and we used to go there for holidays, and I got to know it very well then. And then when I went back just before I started at Central, so I was about age 18, and I remember thinking very positively then that there was a feast of things to do from this landscape, and so it has been, and it's kept me going for a very long time. And I make visits down there frequently. I like that fact that you go to somewhere and you draw directly from the place, and then there is that physical distance coming back to my studio here in Dorset, and I'm somehow separated from the immediacy of where I've been working, so that I can consolidate, if you like, what I'm doing back in the studio, which is a different process to the drawing directly from the place.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the process actually, because how much do you do when you're there? What happens through the seeing the landscape, walking in the landscape, feeling the landscape, to drawing it, painting it? What's the processes? How much is inside? How much is outside?
So I'll go to Cornwall. I know the area very well, and I will take my drawing book, and I'll, depending on the state of the tide, the weather, I'll walk up either side of the harbour, it's a natural harbour, and there's 2 very steep cliffs on either side, and I'll walk up one side or the other depending on which bit I want to draw from. And then I'll make a series of often on very small sketchbooks, sometimes only this size.
Okay.
And I'll make a series of very immediate drawings to try and get down. There's a kind of urgency. I need to get down what I want to get down. And then I might do larger drawings, but it's often very windy up there, and there's often so a large sketchbook is actually quite difficult to hold.
Yeah.
And I want to get down what I need to. It's almost like handwriting. I want to get it down very quickly. And I'll draw, and I may stay there for a week in a rented cottage, or 2 weeks, or perhaps just a day trip from here, and draw get as much information as I can. And then I will then bring the drawings back to the studio, or if I'm staying in a cottage, I will do a series of work from what I'm doing there, and then go back to the cliffs, need more information, come back again. And then I will start, when I bring them back to the studio, I'll often tear them out of the sketchbook, lay them out on the table, put them up on the wall as drawings. And it's then a very different process that takes place, because I'll be um, recalling in my mind and selecting what I want to select onto the boards that I then use. So, the drawing is an immediate thing, and the painting is a different process, but the two work together symbiotically in a way. I'm continually referring to the drawings back in the studio, and often I draw on the paintings, but it's more a reflective process. Those tools like the sandpaper and the scourer are just as important, and my ruler and my pencil just as important as paints and brushes to the work. You know, they are part of the tools of the trade, if you like.
Well, I guess they add these sort of invisible layers that build up this incredible sense of longevity about your work. You know,
they do, and it's nice that you notice that, because actually it's partly a kind of permanency about the place that I want to bring out. So so the actual histories of the traces of the paint and the scouring are, in a sense, there's a permanency about that, which is the same as a landscape, if you like.
The other thing that I think is incredibly interesting from a layperson's point of view to ask you is how you decide on scale. So what makes you, and how you take a vast landscape and capture it in. And
I think the small pictures sometimes come out from trying to get a huge expansive landscape into a very small book, into a very small drawing.
Okay.
And I think sometimes that's how the small pictures come out. And then, because it's such a very big landscape, I want to produce a very expansive picture. So something like, there's a painting called Headlands 4, which is in this coming show.
Because is that the biggest painting?
It probably is. It's about 3 by 6 foot, so it probably is the biggest painting I've actually ever done. In that painting, I've climbed up to the onto the right-hand side of the harbour, very steep, looking down, and there's an extraordinary view looking down onto this promontory, which is almost dinosaur-like. It pushes out into the sea. Then there's a headland on the other side, more headlands going round, and the sea is often in a sort of converging state of currents. So there's a lot of surf and dynamism up there, and I wanted to try and capture that, and I thought it needs to be big, this picture. I've done a lot of small ones. It's a series of about 5 or 6 paintings, but that was the culmination of the biggest one. There's a painting, Pentagon Cliff, and there's a little bit which is in this show, and there's a little bit of sea surf that actually I've scoured to the point of it's almost crystalline in a sense, and I like that idea of the texture of the rocks and the sea. The materials themselves are almost it's like a language, a visual language that is the equivalent. It's an equivalent to the surf on the sea, or the equivalent to the black slate.
I think you connect with the landscape with a great sense of integrity. It isn't, you're not looking for that, in my opinion, that moment.
No, I'm not, you're right.
You don't capture the weather. Your work is not about the storms. It's not about, you don't, no. Actually, pretty much all your skies are a flat, sort of lovely, hopeful blue. So you capture something else, which is the sort of geology and the sort of history of the land that we walk on, and the sea that we look at, and the ever-present element of it, I think, and the fact that it's been here long before us and will be here long after us. Generationally, it's part of history, it's part of the future. And I think, for me, your paintings capture that that sense of endurance, of appreciation, of respect towards the land. That's an incredibly unique way to approach things as a landscape painter, because if you look around at your contemporaries and lots of other people, and this is not saying one's better or worse at all, it's different, is I do feel your interpretation and style of how you approach the land is really quite unique and contemporary and refreshing for what's on offer, at the moment?
I walk up to a familiar view, and even though I know it so well, I smile a kind of, I welcome it. Here you are, because it's almost like a love affair in a sense with the landscape. If it stopped making me catch my breath, then I'd know that I needed to move on somewhere else. There was a place in one painting which is Gull Rock. It's a little bit further up from Boscastle Harbour, and I hadn't been there before, and I was walking on coast path, and suddenly turning the corner, this extraordinary slice of black slate, sharply diving into the sea, and a huge boulder at the bottom, and it was almost like a precursor for the rest of that beautiful landscape. And then, of course, immediately I wanted to paint that. It continues to give me inspiration.
Do you think the landscape, I mean, what I find interesting as well is your style. It's very linear, architectural. Everything's got a sort of point or an edge. It's incredibly beautifully fits in together, like a jigsaw almost. But at what point did you develop that way of paring the landscape down into a sort of flattened perspective, even though your paintings have immense perspective? But if you know what I mean, how did you end up creating that style?
It's almost impossible there's a point when I said, oh, that's how it's going to be. It's developed over 30 years of 40 years of painting, really. It's developed over time. It's arrived at itself, really. It's how it's come about. I'm interested in selecting and reducing those things that appeal to me, and yet I want to be true to the place. I wouldn't want the landscape not to be like North Cornwall or Godrevy or Ireland or Scotland or wherever it is I'm painting from, or Greece. I want it to be true to that place. So those elements that I picked out that are quite dynamic and geometric, I see them there, but I pick those out. Those are the things that I select out. And when I'm doing a drawing, the light might be hitting a shape of a field, or the wall, for instance, in Seawall Trafalgar, those paintings as a dry stone wall that seemed very white. And I like that abruptness of the wall with the green fields and then the headlands beyond. And it's those things that I see and I want to select out. So the drawings, I will start to do that with the drawings, and then with the paintings I'm much more measured, and then if I go back, if I'm painting a picture here in the studio in Dorset, I go revisit the place and I might look at where I was painting that picture and see there's that shape. Oh good, yes, I am right, it is there, I haven't made it up, it does exist, and it's arrived initially from that first drawing and that first looking, so they in the end it's a continual thing of going back into, and the painting's always referring back to the place, even though it becomes something in its own right. Well, I hope it does anyway.
I think that's very well put, because interestingly you said you want to capture the place. And when we have your work in the gallery and we have it in the window, or it's a solo show and it's completely on all walls of the gallery, you honestly wouldn't believe how many people stop outside and come through shouting through our constantly open door, is this Cornwall? Is this North Cornwall? Is this Ireland, when you had Ireland in the show 2 years ago?
Yes.
And people who know those places know that's what they are.
Good. Well, I mean, I couldn't be more happy, if a painting, and I get emails sometimes from people to say that painting has reminded me of a walk I've done in Boscastle, or a walk I've done in Cornwall, or if it's of Cornwall but it reminds them of Ireland, then that's absolutely what I'm happy to hear.
I think that's right. I mean, obviously for you and for your work, I think it's about the concept of the coast, as you say, whether it's
Yes.
what it means
Yes.
for you and the place you paint is personal, how it's interpreted and what it evokes for someone else. There's lots of room for interpretation. It makes your paintings very generous.
I can't justify abstracting the elements if I feel they aren't actually there. So that's an important consideration in it, if you like. I think.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of really comfortable marriage between abstraction and something very familiar. You know, it's
Yes.
I think you get that very well, and different people respond in different ways. Personally, I am lucky to have one of your paintings in my bedroom. And so it's the first thing I look at in the morning, and it's the last thing I look at night. And I find it really sets me for the day. It's like if you live in a city, you don't have that space. And I think for me, your paintings create space. They bring space into a smaller, more urban environment, and with incredible, powerful impact. I mean, in fact, Andrew Lambeth, who wrote the forward for this, for our catalogue for your upcoming show, which obviously this Zoom chat is all about, is the upcoming show. And he described your work as having serenity and power, which I thought really summed it up completely. I thought it doesn't matter how many words we pick, it comes down to that gentleness and that power.
That's nice, you know, especially as when I'm looking at that landscape, there is this extraordinary power of both the cliffs and the sea working together. But in some way, I'm trying to pin that down. I suppose I'm trying to keep that anchored, and I guess that's what you know, that's what I'm trying to achieve with the pictures. Is keeping that structure.
And who would you say, a completely left field question, but looking at, you know, artists from before and in the past, who would you say have been a big influence in your art? And also, well, the second part of the question is also, at what point did you make the bold decision that you were going to become an artist as your career?
Well, starting with the second part of the question, I would say that there was never a moment when I thought I'm going to be a painter. Both my grandparents were professional artists, and my grandmother came to live with us, and I used to watch her as a child painting and drawing, and it just became a way of life. It seemed perfectly normal, and I used to draw on the kitchen table, and it wasn't a case of will I be an artist or won't I be? It just seemed to be what I've always wanted to do, and what's just happened in a sense. And then I had a huge support from my parents as well, which was massively, probably far bigger than they ever realised. You know, their support was wonderful, actually. But influences would be initially going back to the permanence of landscape, Cézanne, and then there are other artists, St Ives Group, and then Ben Nicholson and Keith Vaughan, and an artist I admire very much who's now dead, Alex Mackenzie, and then Richard Diebenkorn.
And just looking at the show in general that's coming up, how many paintings will be in it, roughly, do you think?
There are about 40 probably altogether, 35. It's quite a big body of work, and a lot of larger pieces this time, actually, as I've been working on, and some drawings as well. There's a painting, Long Harbour, which is 3 boards, Long Harbour Triptych, which is actually 3 boards which I decided to put together, which is actually slightly different to the other paintings in that normally I like to be from a very elevated position on the landscape, so I'm high. And in this case, I'm actually down on the harbour, on the base of the harbour, and looking out to the gap. And in fact, it was you, Sarah, who noticed that there was the little gap of the sky in the distance. And I was pleased you noticed that, because I unconsciously had put that in. But of course, it's very important with a harbour that you see that way through into the open sea beyond. There's a series of paintings on Tintagel coast, which is a little further down from the coast from Boscastle. And I went there initially because I wanted to look back at the familiar coasts I know so well from a different aspect. So Tintagel, you look up towards Boscastle, and there's a very interesting dip in the land that I enjoyed looking at, and it's also very vertiginous, so you're looking down onto this particularly turquoise sea.
Do you ever let anybody into your studio? Are you quite...
I'm not good at that, actually. I'm one of those artists who I tend to prefer, if something's not finished, if somebody were to come in and say they either like it or they don't like it, or there's something it'll put me out. So I have to be careful with that. I'm ready when my paintings they're ready in a way when they go to the framers. I feel they're ready, but equally when they've gone to the exhibition, while they're still in my studio, they are in a sense still work, possibly in progress. So it's quite sacrosanct, actually. Yes, it is. Yes, yeah.
We're sort of privileged to get a glimpse here of behind you.
Oh yes, there's some work there, but those are all finished and ready for their framing, so they're ready, so to speak. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see it all again in Thackeray Gallery, hanging on the walls. That you always hang them beautifully.